Good morning. It's 8 o'clock in Bonn, Germany, and welcome to the Bonn Global Event Series at Daring Cities 2020 Virtual Forum. My name is Susanne Nolden, and I am here on behalf of the Department of International Affairs and Global Sustainability of the City of Bonn. And we have shaped this series to happen at 6 mornings, German mornings, of course, during the Daring Cities virtual forum every Tuesday and Thursday. And we're incredibly happy, honored, and proud to kick off this first event with our annual international partner, which is the Right Livelihood College in Bonn. Welcome, Arthur. He would do the moderation today, Arthur Guichet. And the Right Livelihood College has a special history with Bonn. It is 40 years now that Jakob von Uexküll has founded the Right Livelihood Award and Foundation. I had the honor to meet Jakob in 2007 or so, and I was deeply inspired. And 20 years ago, in 2010, we were able to welcome 80 laureates of the Right Livelihood Award in Bonn for a conference called Change Directions. And actually at that time, many key players in Bonn hosted events with these laureates, and that was a source of inspiration and maybe perhaps even a blueprint for this mini series because it was so impactful and had so many late collateral benefits. One of them was the foundation of the Right Livelihood College in Bonn, which was settled with the Center for Development Research of the university and supported by German academic exchange as well. And since shortly after the conference, researchers from the developing world are able to meet with laureates, to learn from them, lectures are held. I personally experienced, for example, Denis Mukwege, and another name will fall shortly. So that's a very inspiring history, and we're so happy to share this with you. And we're so happy to have 6 events come up in the next weeks. But now, without further ado, I would like to thank ICLEI, of course, we're a partner in Daring Cities with them, and the Right Livelihood College for hosting this very first starter session of the Bonn Global Series, which will be followed by other events hosted by local key players. The next one will be by the Bonn Alliance for Sustainability Research next Tuesday. And hand over to a very inspirational person who's really thinking out of the box. And thinking out of the box is what we need when the situation demands us to be daring. So I'd like to welcome today, I'm very honored to do that, Mr. Tony Rinaudo from Australia, the forest maker. And now Arthur, please take over.
Thank you, Susanne, for this introduction. So, as you mentioned, these events enter into the part of the Right Livelihood College activity in Bonn. And the Right Livelihood College is a global education and research initiative of universities and the Right Livelihood Award Foundation. The Right Livelihood Award Foundation were funded in 1980 to honor and support courageous people solving global problems. They also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. And just a week ago, the Right Livelihood Award laureates 2020 were announced, and this year laureates are Nasrim Sotoudeh for her fearless activism and great personal risk to promote political freedom and human rights in Iran, Brian Stevenson for his inspiring endeavor to reform the US criminal justice system and advance racial reconciliation in the face of historic trauma, Lottie Cunningham-Wen for her ceaseless dedication to the protection of indigenous land and communities from exploitation and plunder, and Ales Bialitsky and the non-governmental organization Human Rights Center Vyazna for their resolute struggle for the realization of democracy and human rights in Belarus. There are now 182 laureates from 72 countries. The RLC promote and implement transdisciplinary education and research on social justice, poverty and inequality reduction, and environmental sustainability. you have 9 LLC campuses worldwide, and as you mentioned, one of them is based in Bonn. It's also the World Secretariat for this network since 2014. And all of those campuses are based in Winyon University, and in cooperation with the Alternative Nobel Prize laureate, they found a unique polycentric global network of development expertise and professional. So it's our pleasure today to welcome the Australian agronomist Tony Rinaudo, also known as the Forest Maker. Tony received the Right Livelihood Award in 2018 for demonstrating on a large scale how dry lands can be greened at minimal cost, improving the livelihood of millions of people. So without further notice, we will now watch a short YouTube video to present Tony.
You work with nature, miracles are possible. Even in a dry region with intermittent or irregular rainfall, you can turn that around when you work with nature to make it a highly productive and stable system.
So Tony, you are today you are World Vision Australian Senior Climate Action Advisor. For many people, you are certainly an environmental hero after making a positive impact on food security and environmental sustainability and resilience for thousands of vulnerable communities around the world. Once again, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And you would like to talk about the mitigation and adaptation benefits of your work in reforestation. Once again, on a small format, so I will ask you the first question, but for our audience, please use the chat function and to ask any question, and we will take some of them by till later on. So Tony, my first question for you today will be, can you please elaborate on your farmer management natural regeneration approach that was mentioned in a video? And also, how do you convince communities and land users, such as farmers, pastoralists, to change their way of working and begin managing trees?
Thank you, Arthur and Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So, farmer managed natural regeneration, and I'll refer to that as FMNR. It's both a technical forestry practice and a community development practice. And the technical side is quite simple. And you saw on the film there, if this represents a living tree stump, and across millions of hectares, there are tree stumps with the ability to sprout or simply seeds in the ground that are suppressed. And if you take that, there's too much competition there, too many stems have come up, and it'll take a long time to become a tree. So you simply remove the excess growth, the weaker ones, the smaller ones, the crooked ones, and you select the best growth. And that frees it up to grow very, very quickly. Eventually you might just leave one, but because we're often dealing with poor people, we leave up to 5 because they have immediate and intermediate needs for fuel wood and construction. So the practice is simple. As a development practice, it involves mobilizing communities and empowering them to take charge of the natural resources at their disposal. So again, very, very simple, but very powerful concept. How do we convince people to adopt these practices? And, you know, people call me funny names, the forest maker. Here they say the tree whisperer, but they're surprised when I tell them actually 90% of my time I spend regreening, not landscapes, but mindscapes, because this is where the real battle is. If human beliefs and actions are what caused deforestation in the first place, that's the area that you have to tackle first. And if I can convince communities and individuals that they will have a better future for their children and for themselves by working with nature instead of always destroying it, then the rest is relatively easy. As you saw in the photo, nature is able to self-heal if you allow it. And one of my key questions is, what future do you want for your children? And every parent around the world wishes to have a better future for their children. And then my follow-up question is, will you be willing to come on a journey with me, and we'll discover together how to make that possible?
So thank you for this really short but very clear and inspiring answer. And then we had the chance to either meet, or I had the chance to attend some of your previous presentation or past work. So then I would like to ask you another question. Then on your work on reforestation, you mentioned sometimes that it has, or always that it has an impact also with water management, land degradation, or also temperature for crops or so on. Can you please elaborate a bit on this?
These subjects are so fascinating, and I really believe that in the near future, it's only farmers who have some tree cover on their land that will remain productive in a climate changing world. If you take the example of temperature, particularly in the tropics, many crops are already growing at their upper threshold, their optimum temperature. For every 1 degree Celsius above, say, 35 degrees, there's a 10% decrease in crop yield. Livestock reduce their consumption because they're not motivated to eat in the heat. So it has a big impact on production. Now, if you have a light shade scattered across the field, you can increase your yield 50 to 70%. And this is because crops simply close down in the middle of the day when it's too hot. They stop producing, they stop photosynthesizing. 15% shade cover will reduce air temperatures in West Africa 10 degrees Celsius. That's so significant. It will reduce bare soil temperature by 36 degrees Celsius. This has such a big impact. And then on another level, I was told by a farmer in northern Ethiopia, before they started this restoration work, they could work until 10 a.m. in the morning. And after that, they had to go inside because it was simply too hot. Today, if they wish, they can work all day because temperature has cooled. And on the water question, again, I find it just so fascinating. I've got an example. If you have a bare surface and it rains, and in the tropics, the rain comes very heavily, most of the water will just flow off. And you get a flood downstream, and when the rain stops, if it doesn't come back within a week or so, you're experiencing drought. If you replace the vegetation and have an organic soil, 1% organic matter across 1 hectare of land will hold 144,000 liters of water. 144,000 liters. So effectively, you're drought-proofing your land. But you can have a very heavy rain, and it'll rain and rain maybe for days, and there's no or very little flowing out. It's only just now starting to flow. Then you have a dry spell, the moisture is stored in the soil, and maybe you go a week 2 weeks without rain, and that water is being slowly released to the plant. It's just amazing how within nature, these mechanisms are inbuilt if we will only work with them. And another fascinating thing that's been discovered is some tree species are practicing hydraulic lift. So effectively bio-irrigating your crops, drawing water from deep in the soil layers, but at night time through the shallow layers of roots, they're leaking that moisture, effectively irrigating the nearby crop plants. And there's so many things that I could add to this, but it's the difference between survival or failing as a farmer.
Thank you for your demonstration and this once again really clear answer. Just a quick question, because I forgot to ask you earlier, on how many countries do you intervene already, and if you can cite some of them, that would be great, please.
So through World Vision, I work for World Vision. Currently, we have introduced this approach into about 25 countries. Some of the leading countries, the ones that have really embraced this, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somaliland, Uganda, Senegal, Ghana, and of course Niger, where the work started. But it's been introduced into Asian countries and other parts of Africa.
Thank you. And then, in your own opinion, do you think that in the current situation, do you think that a reforestation process is still possible, or do we really, or the damage that we done to the forest are already too bad to have a successful reforestation process?
You know, starting my career off in Niger Republic on the edge of the Sahara Desert, in one of the poorest countries of the world, with minimal financial or technical resources, to see the transformation across today more than 6 million hectares, some estimates even 10 million hectares, more than 200 million trees restored under those conditions. I believe there's very few places where you couldn't have some adaptation of this approach. And of course, there's the option of tree planting, but working with nature, it's amazing the self-healing capacity built into environments.
Okay, thank you once again. Should we ask, maybe go over to Till to see if we have any question on the chat? Or
okay, yes. Good morning, good afternoon. So we have several questions. I think we can start with 2 questions. First, question by Felix, who's asking, are you doing any work in Kenya already? I think you briefly mentioned Kenya already, but maybe you could briefly say what you have been doing or are doing in Kenya. And the second question, Hank asks, does this method only works for small borders or also on larger scales?
Mm-hmm. So in Kenya, this work has been ongoing since around 2012 through World Vision and through other organizations. And it's happening in the northern semi-arid regions and in the more humid central and southern regions, primarily with smallholder farmers, and in some cases on community land where they're restoring communal forests, not just their own private farmland, but it's being uptaken very enthusiastically. One study was done and they discovered that farmers practicing this approach, in a normal year, they were marginally better off than their non-practicing neighbors. In a drought year, they were 500% better off. More fuel wood, more ability to keep bees and sell honey, more fodder, higher crop yields, greater diversification of their production unit. And so it's having a very big impact. And there's nothing that breeds success like success. Neighbors see their neighbors doing well and they copy it. And we also have strong partners in Kenya The World Agroforestry Center is doing a lot of research and spearheading their own regreening Africa programs as well. The second question, the principles hold, no matter what the scale of the farm, the principles of FMNR hold, but the important thing is, what is your objective? Are you wanting to increase fuel wood supply or soil fertility or produce timber or biodiversity? That will guide the exact way that you unfold this approach.
Okay, thank you for those two answers once again. Then I will have one question coming from my side, and then next one we will take it once again from the chat. So my question now is not really connected to your work, more maybe your opinion. We hear more and more companies, or mainly big companies or states, willing to basically plant trees in order to fight climate change. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think of this type of project based on your experience? Do you have maybe any practical tips or recommendation? And yeah, and if you think or have an opinion regarding the land issue disputes that could emerge from such big projects, especially if they done abroad.
Thank you. These are very important questions and very relevant to this period in time. The need and the potential is simply enormous. A study was done by the Crowther Lab in Zurich, estimating almost 1 billion hectares where theoretically, at least, reforestation is possible. In addition, there are more than 2 billion hectares of degraded agricultural and grazing land, which could be improved. Productivity could be improved by adding some level of trees to those landscapes. So incredible need. And then you have climate change. We need to draw down the greenhouse gases. What I would urge is, this should not be a get out of jail free card. We still need to decarbonize our economies, but by all means, we need to do this. In my experience, mostly in Africa, but in other countries, large-scale plantations have been a failure on many fronts. Socially, in the case where people may be displaced or their access to land is reduced. Economically, often there's a very poor return. Environmentally, unfortunately, often monocultures of exotic species are favored. And technically, particularly in the drier areas, and this was my experience in Niger, up to 80% or even more of the trees simply die. So my advice would be, instead of displacing people, work with them, empower them, enable them to take charge of the process. There are 1.5 billion people living on smallholder farms in the developing world. 80% of the farmland in Africa and Asia is managed by smallholders. So you can still have a big project, but work with the people whose livelihoods are at stake. We simply need to demonstrate to them how their livelihood could improve by working with nature, by restoring the trees, and then work with them to eliminate the constraints. Many people would do this work, but there are constraints stopping them. Finally, what do I think of the implications for removing people or affecting their livelihood? I think in many cases, it's simply a crime against humanity. This is everything that they know, their only means of providing for their families, and to prevent them from doing that is a crime against humanity. And also, because they're also stewards of the landscape, ultimately it's a crime against nature, because those actions can lead to degradation, not improvement.
Thank you very much. So we will go back to the chat. Till, do we have any more questions?
Yes, Chris is asking, in your experience, to what degree do religious or spiritual beliefs have a part to play in changing mindscapes around land management?
Oh, this is so important, and wherever possible, we work with faith-based groups of any stripe and color. because at the heart, as I mentioned, at the heart, people's actions spring from what they believe. And many religions have an ethic of environmental stewardship. And so we can use this to great advantage to rekindle what people know deep down, but perhaps they've never been encouraged in that direction, or they haven't realized their responsibility before their God to care for creation. So this is a very powerful topic.
Yeah, thank you. Till, I think we have a couple of more questions from the chat. So I think we'll now take, for the next 2-3 questions, we will take them from. So please go ahead with one.
Okay, so 2 more questions. The first one is by Smita. Given IPBES and other UN studies where diet and food choice are often implicated in deforestation or other pandemics nowadays, what learning would you suggest to guide us to policy agenda setting? That was the first by Smita. And Mahmoud is asking what was the procedure for regeneration? So I think he's asking, as far as he understood, the first thing is to select local plants, and what else should we do? Because that seems not too simple, and what are the challenges?
So I'm not sure if I fully understand the first question, but I'll give it a try. It's important to maximize the biodiversity of a landscape. And very often, if you go back in history, the forest was people's supermarket, their hardware store, their health clinic. That's where the water is cycled and so on. And as you lose the forest, you lose that biodiversity, the high vitamin fruits, the edible leaves, the fodder for livestock, the source of wildlife. If you lose the forest, you lose that very rich source of nutrition, which is valuable in its own right, but in many places, particularly with climate change, where we're experiencing more and more often, we're experiencing crop failure. It used to be the only fallback, the only insurance policy a community had. Remove that forest, and they're totally in the hands of becoming beggars, reliant on outside assistance. So it's very important from the nutrition aspect. And as we've become sorely aware through the COVID crisis, tampering with nature and destroying natural cycles of life, contributing to the illegal wildlife trade, exposes us to great biological dangers. And we need to respect nature, if for no other reason than for our own safety and health. So I hope I've answered that question, Till. Now, the second question, so I gave you just the basics of, it's based on what's already pre-existing. So first, we need to survey a landscape. And very often on first appearance, it would seem that there's absolutely nothing there, that everything's been removed, but it requires a closer look to identify what's that plant there that looks like a weed? What's that shrub over there? Is it really a shrub? Or is it a tree that's been cut down and it's sprouting, but it's not growing into a tree? So first identify what's there, then select the ones that you want to use for your purpose. And I listed them. It could be for fodder, for biodiversity, for some trees provide fertilizer for the soil and so on. Select the species for the purpose and do that thinning and pruning. The other major issue is to manage the constraints. Very often, the reason why these areas don't restore naturally by themselves is because of regular burning, continuous grazing, continuous harvesting of woody biomass, thorough ploughing across the whole landscape. If you change those behaviors, then nature can heal itself. Beyond that, often there's a policy constraint. Many countries, in an effort to protect their forests, have created laws that have the opposite effect. These laws say the trees belong to the government, don't touch them. But poor people have to live, and of course they'll cut them. Our experience has been, as soon as you give ownership and user rights and the responsibility and education to manage these resources sustainably, you will have people being the most important guardians and protectors of the forest because it's in their self-interest. So these are some of the important elements of this process.
Thank you very much. Should we take more questions?
Yes, please go ahead with a bit more question from the chat, because I have to admit Tony already answered my next question. So
Okay, so we have one from Irene from Kenya. How do you manage to stay committed in this course, and how do we get champion farmers completely immersed in restoration despite some challenges they face towards successful regreening? That was Irene's question. And one question from Sylvia. What is the direct impact on people, especially children? And does it also have an impact on people who are forced to leave their country because of environmental destruction?
Okay, so for Irene, what motivates me has many layers. When I was a child growing up in rural part of Australia, I was devastated to see denuded landscapes, industrial scale clearing of land, steep hills, and you didn't need a degree in ecology to see this was wrong, that the approach used was wrong. Higher temperatures, greater erosion, loss of biodiversity. And it really made me angry. And at the same time, there were people, I would watch the news, I would read newspapers, children just like me who, through no fault of their own, were growing up elsewhere but hungry. And I felt very powerless. So I said a prayer, simply asking God, please use me somewhere, somehow, to make a difference. So at the very core, that's what drives me. It's a commitment to be faithful to that prayer. In 1983, I'd already been in Niger Republic 3 years. And in this year, the rains failed completely. And during the early part of 1984, we launched into a massive food for work program. We were feeding thousands of people. And just to see the suffering, the adults being reduced to begging and needing so much external help, it had a very big impact on me. And I realized by that time we had discovered this process of FMNR 1 year prior to this. And I realized all of this suffering was totally unnecessary. If we had trees in this landscape, this famine would not have happened. The drought would have occurred, but the famine would not have happened. People would have had self-sufficiency from the restored environment. And so it became a personal challenge to me, to the degree possible, not to let that happen again. And, you know, I started off in Niger, but in the 20 years since leaving then, I've been a career evangelist traveling the world, promoting land restoration methods, particularly FMNR, but encouraging people to work with nature instead of uselessly fighting against it. Till, could you please repeat the second half of Irene's question?
Okay. How do we get champion farmers completely immersed in restoration despite some challenges they face towards successful regreening?
So an old farmer said to me once, Tony, if you tell me something, I don't believe you. You're a nice person, but if your advice is wrong, I will suffer. You continue with your comfortable life, but I will suffer. If your paid staff tell us, I don't believe them either because they're paid to tell us. But if a farmer tells us, we know that their livelihood depends on what they're saying, and we believe them. So bring farmers together, get them talking, expose them to the farmers who are succeeding in these methods. That's my advice. And Sylvia's question, can you repeat, please, Till?
Yeah. What is the direct impact on people, especially children, and how does it have an impact on people who are forced to leave their country because of environmental destruction?
Oh, definitely. So I hinted at that strongly already, that the famine experience I had in Niger Republic, this was not so much because of the drought. Everybody screams drought, drought. It was because the landscape had been altered and was unable to function as it was designed to function. And when you destroy nature, there are consequences, hunger, greater competition and conflict over scarce resources, and ultimately migration. So it has a very big impact. The Arab Spring in Syria was preceded by 10 years of unprecedented drought. So these things have very big implications.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was our last question from the chat, unfortunately. And I would just like to add something to your answer for the last question, that on the 13th of this month, the next Bonn Global Conference or topic will be Bonn Alliance for Sustainability's research with field research on climate migration. So the person who asked the question, please, and all of you, please check all the upcoming Bonn Global and Daring Cities program and conferences. You will find a lot of interesting conversation, presentation, and so on. So Tony, once again, thank you. I would like to ask you one last question to conclude, and would be, what are your hopes or message about the upcoming COP26? What would you like to say, maybe to involve parties and so on as a conclusion? And maybe one or two more sentences about a takeaway message after this conversation today.
Thank you, Arthur. So my hopes are that the parties will actually stop talking and start taking action. We have so many examples of what to do with alternative energy, with land restoration, with climate smart agriculture. We know what to do. We just need to do it. So that's my hope. What I would say is, by all means, let's join hands in a massive land restoration program, but let's not use that as greenwashing. We still must decarbonize our economies. And I fear that many governments see this as a way out, a way off the hook, so they can keep polluting. It's not an option. It's very clear the science gives us no room to continue our lifestyle as we have been. I would ask not to displace people or to turn them into just day laborers in some massive tree planting scheme. Design projects that enable and empower the local populations. They will be your strongest allies and your surest opportunity for success. And finally, use this opportunity to promote proven methods of land restoration and to support grassroots mass movements which can bring about lasting change. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Tony, for this conversation. I would like to also thank the audience for a lot of really, really good question in the chat function. Thank you, Till, as well. Thank you, Susanna. It was really great to hear you once again, Tony, to learn once again more about your important work on and your contribution to reforestation. I would say that my takeaway from this session, despite all the technical aspects that you had mentioned and positive, would be really what you said at the end. Stop talking, take actions. local involvement from local communities and so on. I fear we say it every time, but we say it every time because it's so important. And I would also like to thank once again the City of Bonn and the RLC Bonn campus for the organization of this event. I was at ICRE, where we're sitting today in Bonn, and the Daring City for the crucial support in the making of this event and this conversation. And I am encouraging all of you to have a look at the rest of the series of Daring Cities 2020 that started yesterday and that will continue until the 28th of October. Till, as the RLC Bonn campus coordinator, do you want to add something at the end?
Thank you very much, Tony, for this inspiring talk. I mean, you have had the chance to come physically to Bonn, and we enjoyed it a lot last time, and it was important to have this session here, but we are also hoping that we will meet in Bonn again in the coming years and to see you physically in, for example, in the Alte Rathaus of the city of Bonn or at the University of Bonn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Tony. It's been our pleasure to have you. And thank you again, Tony, Cheer, all our partners, Susanne, and the audience for your active participation. Thank you very much and have a good day.